Chapter 4. Under the Cherry Tree. The following day, Kiku and Machiko became members of the Nagano household. Nobuo came home from school to find Machiko playing near the gate, drawing something on the ground. "Hey, this is my house," proclaimed Machiko, leaping to her feet when she saw Nobuo. She stretched out her arms so that he could not pass. "So this is my own sister," thought Nobuo as he studied the little figure, her mouth closed in a defiant line. Her arms spread out to block the way. Mariko's skin was fair, her eyes were large, and she had a rounded face. Her tightly closed lips gave her a cheeky yet lovable expression. Nobuo was thrilled to think that this was his sister, but tried to slip past her without saving anything. She would not give way. "You mustn't come in here. This is my house," she shouted. "Huh, she's just a cheeky little kid," thought Nobuo. He longed to say, "I'm your big brother, silly." But he looked down at her without saying a word. The top of her bobbed head barely reached his shoulder. "Ah, Nobuo, you're back." It was Kiku appearing at the door. Nobuo blushed and bowed deeply. "Machiko, what do you think you are doing, getting in your big brother's way?" Kiku scolded her gently. "What? Is he my brother?" Machiko burst into happy giggles. "My brother! Machiko didn't know you were her brother. I say, Machiko has a big grown-up doll. Let's play with it, shall we?" she said, pulling him by the hand. Her chubby little hand, strangely tickly, gave him a pleasant sensation. All the same, he felt inexplicably shy, and all he could say was, "Huh," as he darted into the house. "Nobuo, it's lunchtime." Kiku came up to him and put her hand on his shoulder. She smelt lovely like Miss Nemoto, and Nobuo was delighted. When he sat down at the table, Machiko put her hand on his knee and whispered in his ear, "Let's play with beanbags afterwards, shall we?" Thinking, "What a little flirt she is," Nobuo picked up his chopsticks, said the customary words of thanks, and began to eat. Machiko looked thunderstruck. "Hey, brother, don't you pray before meals?" "No, I don't pray or anything." "That's funny. Fancy not praying to God, mummy." "No, but that's all right for your brother, just now." After she said this, Kiku began to pray quietly. Nobuo stared at his mother and Machiko with their hands together, their heads bowed. When the prayer was over, Machiko said a loud Amen. All of a sudden, Nobuo felt he was a lonely outsider. When grandmother was alive, they had managed all right without praying, he thought unhappily. Nobuo had no idea what the yellow crescent-shaped object on his plate might be, for neither grandmother nor Tsune the maid had ever produced anything like it. Watching Machiko eating it with evident relish, Nobuo concentrated on eating the accompanying pickles. "Ah, Nobuo, don't you like omelette?" asked Kiku. Nobuo ate without replying. "I don't know whether I like it or not. I've never eaten the stuff before," he said to himself, picking impatiently at the omelette with his chopsticks. But when he tasted his first mouthful, he got a surprise. He could not believe that such delicious food existed in the whole world. "So this is omelette, is it?" he reflected. He had heard of it before, but had no idea what it would be like. To think that Machiko had been enjoying omelette all this time, he thought enviously. Grandmother Tos had eaten neither meat nor eggs, so they used to have nothing but fish and boiled vegetables with their rice. When their father Masayuki came home in the evening, Machiko greeted him with outstretched arms and entwined herself around him, just as she had done the time they had met in the street. Forgetting his customary words of greeting, Nobuo looked on numbly. Then, catching sight of him standing there, Masayuki laid his hand on Nobuo's shoulder. "What's up?" he asked. "You don't look very well." "Nothing," replied Nobuo sulkily, avoiding his father's eye. At supper, Nobuo was just about to pick up his chopsticks when he stopped short, noticing that Masayuki, Kiku, and Machiko were all sitting with their heads bowed. Kiku began to pray. "What's it matter?" he thought. "I'm not a Yaso," and picked up his chopsticks. When Kiku had finished giving thanks, Masayuki and Machiko both said Amen. Hearing Masayuki's Amen, Nobuo felt betrayed. What did this mean? His father had never even prayed before, let alone say Amen. Nobuo felt a twinge of dislike for him. It was a cold Sunday morning. Nobuo awoke to find Masayuki and Machiko already up and about. After breakfast, Machiko put on her best crepe shawl and said, "Come on, big brother, let's hurry and go to church." "What's church?" "Oh, church is where you pray and hear stories and sing songs." Nobuo gazed in silence at Machiko as she hopped excitedly around the room on one foot. Would you like to come with us too, Nobuo? Kiku was dressed in a black kimono, which Nobuo thought looked very well on her. No, I'm not going. Secretly, Nobuo would very much have liked to go with Kiku, but the idea of church did not appeal to him at all. In fact, it gave him that slightly creepy feeling. After they had gone, Masayuki began reading a book, warming one hand over the charcoal heater. Nobuo wondered about going to fly his kite, but that somehow did not feel right. So he resigned himself to sitting vacantly beside Masayuki. What is it? Masayuki turned from his book to Nobuo. Does mother always go to church on Sunday? Yes, I suppose she does. Why, when she could easily have given up Yaso? He sounded exasperated. Nobuo, Masayuki laid his book down on the tatami. His tone was serious. Yes, replied Nobuo, also in a serious tone. Human beings are creatures who must have something to cling to, even if it costs them their very lives. Do you understand? It was difficult for Nobuo to grasp. When you are big, I'll explain it to you sometime. But you see, your grandmother hated Christianity, so she turned your mother out of the house. You were just a baby. Why didn't she take me with her? Bright rays of sunshine were warming the room, because your grandmother would not allow it. Masayuki doubted whether Nobuo could understand such an explanation. Well then, she could have given up Yaso and stayed here instead. Nobuo could not hide his anger. But you see, Nobuo, there are some things that people can give up, and other things that it is impossible for them to give up. Do you mean Yaso was more important to her than I was? Nobuo could not be expected to understand Kiku's attitude. Perhaps so. I don't think your mother would give up her faith even if it meant being crucified. Crucified? What does that mean? Let me see. Just a minute. Masayuki got up and went into the bedroom, returning with a small card in his hand. Nobuo, that is what being crucified means, he said, handing the card to the boy. Nobuo took a glance at the card and gasped. It was painted in the most beautiful colors he had ever seen, but what he saw depicted on the card was brutal. The emaciated form of Christ was hanging on a cross, his hands and feet pierced by nails, and blood flowing from his side. For a moment Nobuo held his breath while he stared at the picture. So that is what being crucified means. What if Mother were to be stripped naked and crucified in such a cruel way? The thought made Nobuo shudder. It horrified him to think that his mother was not prepared to give up Yaso, even if it meant such a fate. This person did something very bad, I suppose, Father? Nobuo spoke hoarsely. He was only 10, and the effect of the crucifixion scene was overwhelming. Not at all. This Jesus Christ didn't do anything bad at all. He healed people who were ill, and told people about God, and loved people. Was he crucified even though he did good things? That's terrible. That's not fair. Among the senior boys at school, there were several who would take small boys like Nobuo by surprise as they walked along the corridors, suddenly giving them a punch or hitting them in the back. If anyone so much as gave Nobuo a jab, he would flare up and fight back, even against a boy twice his size. Now he got more worked up than ever at the thought of a person who had not done anything wrong being crucified like this. It was so unjust. He was almost in tears. It's terrible, isn't it? Said Masayuki, taking the card and studying it himself. I bet this Jesus was angry, wasn't he? No, he wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, he prayed for those who nailed him to the cross. God, he said, please forgive them. I am sorry for them because they do not know what they are doing. What a strange person this Yaso must have been. Nobuo still could not help thinking that Jesus did not get angry because he really had done something wrong. But the only lasting impression he received was the horror of the crucifixion. It was the first hot day in spring, and the cherry trees in the school garden were in full bloom. Nobuo was now in the 4th form and was the class monitor. He had stayed behind to help the teacher, and coming out of school he saw about 10 of his classmates in a huddle under the biggest of the cherry trees, holding a whispered discussion. When Nobuo walked up to them, they exchanged glances and made room for him. Has something happened? Haven't you heard? They say there was some woman's hair in the seniors' cloakroom, and blood all over the place. It was Matsui, the spokesman of the class, who answered with a serious face. I didn't know. That's not all. They say that at night you can hear a woman crying. What if it's a ghost? added the vice monitor Otake in a frightened voice. Tell me exactly who it was who heard the crying. Nobuo remained calm. I don't know. I don't know who heard it, but there doesn't seem to be any doubt about it. What do you all think? Matsui looked round the group. They all nodded together solemnly. Nobuo laughed at the absurdity of it all. That's all just made up. It's not true. How do you know it's not true, Nagano? Everybody says there really are ghosts. At Matsui's words, the other boys nodded. Nobuo was at a loss, but he spoke up again. But my father says there are no such things as ghosts. Oh yeah, well my father says that ghosts really do exist. One by one they all had their say. There was no denying the fact that even among grown-ups there were many who believed in the existence of spirits and ghosts. There's no such thing. Nobuo was resolute. Is that so? All right, just to prove whether there is a ghost or not, how about meeting under this tree at 8 o'clock tonight? Said Matsui. Everyone fell silent, and some of them furtively began to drift away. What about it? Are we going to meet then? Matsui pressed for a reply. The wind blew and scattered cherry blossom on the nodding heads of the boys. We'll all come, so there will be nothing to be afraid of. Right, we'll meet here in the dark, Otake agreed. I expect Nagano will come too, said Matsui with an I'm not going to let you escape look on his face. Of course I'll come. We meet here at 8 o'clock tonight, you said? Nobuo spoke as calmly as would be expected of a class monitor and nodded his assent. That's settled then. Everybody comes, no matter what happens, okay? Matsui looked around the group. Each one agreed. At supper time it began to rain a little, and around 7 o'clock the wind was blowing and it was raining hard. Mother, is it all right if I go to the school this evening? Asked Nobuo. He had been looking out of the window for some time. Gracious me, what business do you have at school? 'Tis time of night. Kiku stared at Nobuo in amazement. It's not important really, but let me think. If it's not important, what's the point in going? Nobuo looked outside again. The rain was making a furious noise. Is there something the matter? Masayuki looked up from his newspaper. They say you can hear a woman's voice crying in the seniors' cloakroom at night. We're all meeting tonight to see if there's a ghost or not. What, a ghost? There aren't such things. Kiku laughed awkwardly. There's no need to go out in all this rain for the sake of such a thing as that. What do you say, dear? Masayuki sat with his arms folded and looked rather stern. It's all right. I won't go. It's obvious that nobody will turn up if it's raining like this, Nobuo said. Is that so? You don't have to go. But tell me, Nobuo, exactly what kind of agreement was made. We were to meet at 8 o'clock tonight under the cherry tree. So you promised to do that, did you? Are you telling me you are thinking of breaking your promise? Masayuki looked Nobuo steadily in the face. I promised to go, but it doesn't matter if I don't go. What does it matter if there's a ghost or not? Nobuo had convinced himself that it was not worth his going out in such heavy rain. Off you go, Nobuo, said Masayuki quietly. All right, but look at the rain. Oh, did you agree that you needn't go if it was raining? Masayuki's tone was severe. No, we didn't decide what would happen if it rained, replied Nobuo, looking up fearfully at his father. If you break a promise, you make yourself lower than a dog or a cat. Dogs and cats don't make promises, so they never break them. That makes them wiser than humans, it seems to me. Nobuo pouted. All this fuss about a silly promise, he thought. As though he could read his thoughts, Masayuki continued. Nobuo, if it's a promise you needn't keep, you oughtn't to have made it in the first place. Yes, said Nobuo, but his knees were knocking. I'll go with you, said Kiku, getting up. Machiko had been asleep since before supper. Kiku, Nobuo is 10. There's nothing to stop him going by himself. The school was half a mile away. Kiku looked at Masayuki uncertainly. Nobuo had not gone very far before he was drenched to the skin. He had to feel his way along the pitch-dark road. Although it was not as windy as he had imagined, being soaking wet did not help him to make progress. He'd walked this way every day for 4 years, but it seemed completely different from the road in daylight. Staggering along, Nobuo told himself over and over again what a fool he had been to make such a stupid promise. I don't suppose there'll be anyone there after I've made all this effort, he muttered, feeling very aggrieved about his father's treatment. Sloshing through muddy puddles, he pressed on, half walking, half stumbling. Although this was called spring rain, his drenched body began to feel very cold indeed. So promises were made to be kept, even though it meant going to such lengths to keep them. The journey of a mere half-mile felt more like 2 or 3, and Nobuo wanted to cry. When he arrived at the school at last, as luck would have it, the rain had turned to a light drizzle. The pitch-black school grounds were silent. He listened but could hear no voices, and it felt as if at any minute the woman's ghostly sobs would break out. Nobuo stealthily approached the rendezvous under the cherry tree. "Who's that?" a voice hissed. Nobuo nearly jumped out of his skin. "It's me, Nagano." "Oh, it's you, is it, Nobuo?" It was the voice of Osamu Yoshikawa, who sat in front of Nobuo in class. Yoshikawa was not an outstanding boy, but he was sensible and got on well at school. "Ah, Yoshikawa, you surprised me, coming in spite of this downpour." Having been quite sure no one would be there, Nobuo was flabbergasted. But it was a promise. Yoshikawa's almost blaze reply had a very grown-up flavor. It was a promise. Nobuo repeated Yoshikawa's words silently. Then a strange thing happened to him. The clear-cut weight of the word promise came home to him. To think that I had no choice but to come, just because my father told me to, not because of my promise. As he considered this, Nobuo suddenly felt ashamed of himself. He thought that Yoshikawa must be the finest person in the world. He felt disgusted with himself for being proud of being class monitor. "It looks as if nobody else is coming," he said. In spite of the fact that they promised to come no matter what. Nobuo had already half persuaded himself that he had come because he had promised. "Yes, but it's raining, remember," said Yoshikawa. There was no trace of self-righteousness in his tone. Nobuo thought that Yoshikawa must be a remarkable person.